We're in the middle of chapter 4 of the Maimer, Balaila, Hahu, Tafshin Chaf, 1960. And before we continue, in the middle of chapter 4, in our copies, we're on page Kuf Yud Aleph. Kuf Yud Aleph, we're in the second paragraph of Ois Daled of chapter 4, for those following along. Yesterday we started discussing a few verses in Song of Songs where God comes knocking on the door asking us to open for him. And he says, Pischi li achoisi rayasi yonasi samasi. Open for me, my sister, my wife, my dove, my perfect one. And we said that all these things, you can just use one. Why is he using all these different terms? Because they represent different aspects of our relationship with God, or different levels in our relationship with God. It begins with Kol Doidi Doifik, the sound of my lover's knock, and he's knocking, and he's saying, Pischili, open for me, open the door for me. And we said that this idea that God is called our lover, right at the beginning, implies that the love that he has for us is an essential love. Why does it imply that it's an essential love? Because he's outside and we're inside. And if there's a door, essential as opposed to a love that's earned or deserved. So it just is. It is because he loves us essentially, not regardless of whether it's something. It's not something that we did to deserve that love. It's just an innate, essential love he has for us. This mimer is not. We're not really going to like a child. No, so like an essential love a parent has for a child, where obviously your love for your child it could be enhanced or could operate at different levels as the child matures, as you grow closer together, as you can identify with each other and talk to each other. But a parent has an essential love for a child that has nothing, that's totally not dependent on anything that the child does. Right? It's an innate, essential love. So we're talking about that love that God has for us. Why? Because as we said, we're in a situation where we have no relationship. We're inside, the door's closed, and he's outside, locked out in the cold and in the rain in the middle of the night. So what's prompting him to knock? The fact that he loves us regardless of what we're doing on a conscious level. Okay. That essential love that God has stirs within us our essential love for God. Our essential love for God is expressed in what way? Self-sacrifice. Because self-sacrifice is not something that you process. When we talked about what we mean, in particular in Chassidus, when we talk about self-sacrifice, is that we're not talking about deciding to give your life for something. That's already not Mesiras Nefesh as we discuss it here. Self-sacrifice means an inability to choose in any other way. An inability to separate yourself intentionally from God, regardless of any purposes. So it's not that you made a calculation and you decided and it's a cause that you believe in. What's a malach?
Somebody can't do it, be good.
No. Well, yeah, malach has no choice. Here we're not talking about the idea of choice. In a sense, yeah. It goes beyond your capacity to choose. Because it's an innate bond. So that awakens within us the Mesiras Nefesh, which is always accessible and available even when we're not serving God on a conscious level. Once we open that door, once Mesiras Nefesh, this move to self-sacrifice is stirred within us, that starts to stir a love for God. And that starts to develop. So it starts with a level of achoisi, and then moves on to rayasi, then yoinasi, and then samasi, going from the first step higher and higher and higher till samasi, the highest level. And we started now in chapter 4 to explain the first level, this level of achoisi, that we are considered, God calls us his sister. What does it mean that he calls us his sister? So we said achoisi, achois, also has the same root as the word ichoy, which means to combine, to blend. Why does a person have a natural love for their sibling that doesn't need to be explained? Because they're siblings. So if you love somebody who's a really terrible person, you didn't know, you met somebody in school, or you met somebody at work, and they're terrible people, and suddenly you start loving them, people are going to ask you for an explanation. What is it about them? What do you see in them? Why do you love them? But if you have a terrible sibling, and you still manage to love them, nobody's going to ask, why do you still love them? Because they're part of you. It's a sibling. It's a natural love that's not dependent on those things. So that represents within us the natural love that a Jew has for God. There's a natural love the Jew has for God. Why is there a natural love that we have for God? Because we are connected to God. Achois, lashon ichoy. a connection where, and we said ichoy specifically means sort of like a blending, almost like a merging together, like woven together, in that it's sort of inseparable. So because we're one with God, we have a natural love for God. Our soul, which is part of God, has a natural love for God because it's a part of God. Where do we get this soul from? We get it as an inheritance from our patriarchs, from Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, particularly Avram, who Avram is referred to as Avram Oyavi, Avram, my lover. God says that Avram was the one who loved him. That's how Avram is identified, Abraham. So that love that we have, that's innate, that's natural within us, is now revealed. And that's, again, it's something that's natural. It's not something that you have to create. It's something that's there. So once we're talking about being at the first step in our service of God, that first step of development where we don't have any love, the first thing is to expose, to reveal, to access that natural love that's already there. This is similar to what the Rebbe talks about in Tanya, about the Ava Misteris, the hidden love, which is the natural love, where he's trying to tell us how we can develop a feeling for God, how to develop a Ava and a Yira, a love and a fear of God. And each method, it requires some effort. It's something that we need to do. We have to work on it to be able to develop the love. And then he tells us that there's a love that's easily accessible to everybody. Why is it easily accessible? Because it's already there. It's not creating a new love. It's not starting to develop one. I'm sorry? You have to open the door. Well, yeah, you have to reveal it. I mean, that also requires some effort. But the point is that you're not trying to develop something new. It's something that's innate, something that's natural within you. So that is the level of achos. Now, the way opening the door, as we said, it begins with Mesiris Nefesh. Once part of it is recognizing, once we and actually in Tanya also there's sort of that method. If you can recognize that you're inseparable from God, you can't separate from God, you understand why is that? Because you're part of God. If you're part of God, there's a natural love that you have for God, just like a natural love for somebody that's a part of you, and then you can now reveal that emotion, that feeling. So that's what we said in the first paragraph in chapter 4. Now let's go inside. Second paragraph in chapter 4. So we started first with talking about the natural love we have for God, and that why this is the first level. But then there's another component to this level of achaisi, of sister. Another aspect of this, another dimension, another angle, is the Isa b'medrash achais ze Avram she'ichas kol boy olam l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Achais, my sister, that refers to Avram. It's a reference to Avram. This is what the Medrash says. It's a reference to Avram. Why? Because as we said, Achais is from the term ichoy, of connecting. So it's Avram who is icha. It's the word like Achais. Ichas kol ba'olam l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He brought people closer, connected people with Hashem. Hainu shechibur es ha'olam im HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He connected the world with God. As the verse says, that Avram called there in the name of God of the universe. V'hainu, sheha'ichoy shel ha'olam im elikos ha'ilei ba'ofen she'olam hu metzius b'fnei atzmei v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu keil ha'olam. When we say that Avram connected the world with God, what are we saying? So we talked about yesterday, we touched on this, the idea of ichoy, and the Gemara talks about the different ways of ichoy. There are different ways different words to use to connect, combine. There's chibur, there's kesher. There are different ways that you can connect things. Ichoy it means like woven together almost, like mended together, blended together. And when you blend something together, it's indistinguishable. You can't see. It's not two different things. So even if you were to attach two things together, you still know they're two things, but they're attached. If you knot two things, it's two things that are knotted together. But they still remain two distinct things that are now brought together. Ichoy is like, connecting it as one, sort of a seamless connection. Meaning that the type of connection that Avram achieved in connecting the world with God wasn't one where it was two separate things, that there's a world, and the world is submitted to God. God rules the world. He's the God of this reality that we know as creation. That's not what it is, because then the verse should have said, Vayikra Hashem Avram b'shem Hashem keil ha'olam, that Avram called out in the name of the God of the universe. Ha'olam, there's a world, and there's the God of the world. But it doesn't say keil ha'olam, it says keil olam. Meaning that he is the life force of the world itself, its very existence. He revealed not just that God dominates or is in charge, is the boss of the world, but that God is its very existence. So that's a much closer attachment, revealing that it's one with God. It's not two separate things. Okay, what does this mean? What does this mean that God is its very life force, that they're not two separate things? We see a world. We see a world that exists separate from God, apart from God. It has its own seemingly independent existence. So we could say that we have a world that exists, but God is the boss, He's in charge, and He runs the world. But when we say that God is the very existence of creation itself, so now it's not two separate things. We're not saying that there's a world and then there's a God that is in charge of the world, even a creator of the world, but that its very existence is God. What does this mean? So, Kamavur b'shar yichud v'amuna b'kitzer, u'b'mamarich sidish al-achir zebarucha. So, in Shar Yichud v'amuna, one of the big chidushim, one of the things Alter Rebbe really introduces in Shar Yichud v'amuna in a very rational way is this idea that he mentions it there, b'kitzer, and much of Chassidic literature discusses at great length this topic, which is shalulei koyach hapoel b'nifal. Were it not for the force of the doer in what he's doing, hainu ilu hoyim mistalek me'ashamayim va'aretz hadvar havaya shemahava machayos. In other words, had the energy that creates heaven and earth and gives it its life were to depart, as the verse says that the world was created through the word of Hashem. So he says, there's the question of what would God do if he wanted to destroy the world. If he was done with this experiment, whatever, either he was pleased with it or he wasn't, but he's tired of it and he wants to destroy the world, what would he do? How would he destroy the world?
Flood it.
He would flood it. Right? That's why he can't flood it because he already said he's not going to flood it again.
Stop saying the word.
Right. So what's the answer? He'll stop speaking it into existence. He doesn't have to do anything to destroy the world. To say that he has to do an act to destroy the world means that there's a world that exists, and granted he's greater and stronger, more mighty and powerful, so therefore he could destroy it, blow it up. But that means that there's a world that exists in a sense independently of him, albeit submitted to him, be weaker than him. But that means that there's something other than God. If the world exists only because God is speaking into existence, constantly creating it, so all he has to do is stop doing it. If he stops creating it, it stops being. In other words, creation, the natural state, in other words, the natural state of existence is non-existence. That's its natural state. And so it existing is unnatural to it. And since it's unnatural, it has to constantly happen. What does this mean? And Tanya Alter Rebbe talks about the Kriyas Yamsuf. And it's brought also the idea, another mashal of throwing a stone. People like it. Alter Rebbe says in Shar Yichud v'Amuna that there are those that make a mistake, philosophers that compare creation to craftsmen crafting something, making something. Or take, let's say, an artist that paints a picture. So the artist paints the picture. It's all the artist's creativity and talent that's on display in the picture. And then once he finishes his canvas, he can hang it up in a museum, and the artist doesn't have to go near it again, and that picture could hang and prosper and live a wonderful life as a painting on a wall in a museum for eternity, forever. So the same idea. God creates a world, and once he finishes creating it, he moves on. He goes on to other things. He starts creating exoplanets. What are they called, right? What they discovered yesterday? They announced he can start doing other things outside of this creation. He gets busy with God's stuff. So Alter Rebbe says it's a mistake. Creation is different than everything else. Why? Because even an artist painting, or a craftsman crafting a work of a sculpture or whatever, a table, you're taking material that already exists and you're just changing its form, its shape. You're reshaping something that's already there. So the thing exists independent of the craftsman, of the artist. And the artist's genius and talent is reshaping it in a way that he wants to, manipulating the way he wants to. But just as the material was there before the artist came along, it's there after the artist leaves. Just now it remains in that form that he fashioned it. Exactly. It's why there's no chiddush, there's nothing new. Whereas creation is a chiddush, it's something new. Meaning that before God created, there wasn't anything. So All of existence's natural state is non-existence. That's what it was. And God has to change it has to now create something from nothing. Right? An analogy of this in our reality, to make it a little clearer, is one of the examples brought is of throwing a stone. A stone doesn't fly. It's inanimate. It falls to the ground. It's rooted on the ground. It's stationary. It doesn't move. But if you're to pick it up and throw it, now it's flying through the air. Flying is against the nature of the stone. It's not something that the stone has a capacity for. It's something new. It's a chiddush. Right? It's a new thing that the stone doesn't possess on its own. The stone has all kinds of qualities innate that it has in itself. Its density, its weight, its whatever, its appearance, it's all these different things. But flying is not not something that's embedded in it. So when you come and introduce this new idea that the stone is going to fly, you throw the stone, now it's flying. But because it's something that's not part of the stone's reality, the moment the force that you put into the stone dissipates, what happens to the stone? It goes back instantly to where it came from. So it drops, it falls
Natural form.
to its natural state. So in order for it to do something unnatural, it needs constant propelling for that to occur. Does that make sense? Similarly, creation, since it's not an actual existence, doesn't exist, since there was nothing, before God created there was nothing, so bringing it into creation is unnatural to it. And so therefore God has to constantly create it. So God speaks, that's why it says, La'olam dvarcha nitzav hashamayim, and as the Baal Shem Tov it interprets this verse to mean that God's words, the Dvar Hashem, the Asarim Amaris, as the Mishnah says, the 10 utterances with which God creates everything, those utterances have to constantly reverberate, as it were, or be spoken for creation to continue to exist. So it's not that He created the world once and now it's just maintenance.
So why made it fun then? Why just destroy the world?
Because he didn't want to undo creation. He wanted to purify it, so he did it in that form. But that's another conversation. But he wasn't trying to end existence. Otherwise, because if he was trying to stop existence, then he failed, obviously, with the flood. Because he didn't. That wasn't the intention. The intention of the flood was purify. But that's another story. Okay. We're on the last line of page Kuf Yud Aleph. Omizem move on. Shebachol rega tzarich liyis hachidush demaisa bereishis. So from this we understand that at every moment there needs to be the renewal of creation. We say it in davening. We say in the morning in Shachris, right, in Birchas Krishma, that God, in His kindness, is constantly renewing creation. And it's explained when we say every day, we actually mean every moment. That it's not just every day. There's a reason why. Elsewhere it talks about why then, if it means every moment, why doesn't it say every moment? Why does it say every day? Okay, that's another conversation. But the point is that when it says He's constantly renewing creation every day, it means at every moment creation is constantly being renewed. Just as it was initially at the beginning of creation. So when we say that God speaks the world into creation, so we see that creation doesn't exist independently. It doesn't have its own independent life force. Or existence. Its whole existence is that God's constantly creating it. But still, when we use the term that God speaks the world into creation, well, we know obviously that we can never take anything that we say about God, any description literally. We have to use anthropomorphic language in order to be able to, so that we can have some kind of an approach to words that we can use so we can understand it on our small human reality and from our perspective. But it's never to be taken literally. It always has to be taken out of its literal sense. Having said that, though, there's a reason why we use different terms to describe God and what He's doing. So even though God doesn't see or hear or speak in the way we understand it, but still the fact that we ascribe one act of God as an act of speech, another act of God as an act of seeing, another act as an act of remembering, and we're using those terms specifically because they convey a certain aspect of God. So that while the analogy doesn't work, the description doesn't work 100%, but there's a specific quality in that term that we use from our own experience that we're applying to God in that sense. Okay? So when we say that God speaks, so in a sense we have to think about what does it mean to speak? Why do we use that term? So speech reveals something that's hidden. But one of the problems with speech is also that speech is something that's external. You only need speech to communicate to somebody outside of yourself. And also, when you speak, the words go out of you. Right? If you say something really offensive, it'll come back. It can come back years later. Years later, you can lose your career. You can lose anything for something you said years before. But it was your words. But once it's out there, it's out there. It, in a sense, is disconnected from you. In a sense. With God, obviously, it doesn't mean it's disconnected. God forbid. It has to exist inside. The Alter Rebbe talks in Tanya about Oisius, the words of creation being within. But that's a link. That's another. We don't have to get there. But still, the point of speech almost implies that there's a certain otherness, a certain independence. Okay. We have cream cheese here. You didn't see it? Okay. So now the Rebbe is saying we're taking it, we're ratcheting it up a notch. That creation, we said that creation, when you look at creation, you see how its total existence is only God. It itself doesn't exist. Right? But we're still coming from the vantage point of creation. We see creation as an existence. When we think deeply into it, we can recognize that this existence is constantly being sustained and animated by God. But then there's an even deeper level. There's, as it says in Kabbalah, les asar panim minei. There's nowhere that God isn't. Meaning that nothing exists outside of Him. Which is, in a sense, a little bit deeper than what we just said. And let's see how that works, how this plays out. A little deeper, creation isn't just the result of the word of Hashem and the breath of His mouth. But it's like the pasuk says that everything God desires, He created. What does that mean? That the real existence of creation emanates from God's desire and will. As explained in Torah, and specifically in the Mamorim, the discourses on Purim in the section of Megillas Esther in Torah. Okay. So, if we think about it, we go back just to the very beginning of creation. Before creation, there's nothing. There's just God. What changed? What changed? What stirred from nothing to become something? So the first step of that was a desire. God desired. Now, at that moment where God desires, does anything exist? No. It's just God. And just His desire. Desire is a hatayas hanefesh. We're gonna see soon inside. It's an inclination or leaning of the soul. So it's an expression of the soul. But all within of the essence, just within yourself. There's nothing outside of it yet. After that, God then goes through the process of actually creating. He speaks creation into existence. But initially, what's there? There's nothing there. It's just God's will. And all of creation comes as a result of God's will. So in its highest form, at its very genesis, creation exists only as God's will. In God's will, there's nothing other than God. It's just Him and His will. There's nothing else. What does this mean? We find within ourselves, we know we can understand divine concepts from understanding ourselves a little bit as well. So it says, so it's explained that will is different than all the other faculties and abilities of the soul. All of the person's faculties and abilities are all talents or capacities, abilities that are outside of the essence of the soul. Therefore, since they are not in the soul, but capacities, powers of the soul, external to the soul, therefore their impact is felt outside of the soul, outside of the person. For example, so let's take the highest, what's the highest ability of the person is his intellect, his intelligence. So when a person exercises that capacity is not the person themselves, it's not your essence. So that capacity, when a person starts thinking, or when he has a creative idea, even after he stops thinking about this topic, that idea still remains after he's finished thinking about it. separate from him. So the idea you're thinking, even if you come up with an idea, even if you created this idea, right? You innovated it. It's your innovation, it's your idea, your creativity. But that idea exists outside of yourself, which is why it's there outside of yourself. There's a famous story. You could relate to this a little bit more abstract, but it, in a sense relates to this. The famous story of the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who was once studying, and he was having a very hard time with a certain topic, and he couldn't understand it, and he labored on it for weeks and weeks. He was thinking about it and studying, and he had a very difficult time until he finally was able to understand a certain passage in the Talmud. Obviously, he was overjoyed that he was able to finally break through and understand it. Anyway, a little time goes by, and he's walking past some yeshiva students that are studying, basic, simple, not people that are on his level of scholarship. And he hears them reading and studying, and they explain this topic the way he understood it. And they do it just matter-of-factly, casually. So he felt very bad. It took him 3 weeks to figure this out, and these guys just matter-of-factly just explain it as if that's just the normal way of understanding it. And so it bothered him. Why was it so difficult for him to come up with it, to understand it? And these guys were able to... So it was revealed to him that, on the contrary, it was his effort that brought this idea into the world. And once the idea is there, now it exists. It's there. And it exists outside of him. And so once it's already there in the realm of understanding, of knowledge, so now it's accessible to anybody to pick up that idea. So it's always creativity. People start to copy it and start to innovate it and work on it. Once that idea is already there, it's an idea maybe they couldn't come up with on their own, but once it's already there, it becomes public property to an extent, where now everybody is free to think about that idea and move it forward. Okay, thank you. We still have some time. Let's keep going. So the idea, intellect, which is the highest ability, the highest power of the person, exists for something outside of it. You think topics that are outside of yourself, and even when you're not thinking them, those ideas still remain. So if you're thinking 1 + 1 = 2, after you stop thinking about it, 1 + 1 still equals 2. So too with regard to emotion. With, for example, love, or the opposite of love. When a person does something for somebody else, motivated by love, even after the love dissipates, the goodness, what he did for the other person still remains. And by the way, I think this means not only actually doing something. I gave you a gift. Because I love you, so I'm giving you a gift. It doesn't just mean that. Sometimes even just the feelings itself. If I have good feelings about you, I'm giving you good vibes, those impact you. And even after I'm no longer feeling that way, but that impact still remains. So even the impact of the emotion itself, without an actual love leading to giving to somebody, giving him something. I give you a gift, obviously the gift remains even after. But even just the feeling itself really lives on even after you don't have that feeling, has an impact even afterwards. And again, where's the feeling felt? It's felt in something outside of you, because these capacities, your capacity for intellect, your capacity for emotion, all exist outside of you, outside of the essence of the soul. However, will, since will is not something that is outside of the soul, it's simply a movement and an inclination of the soul itself. And therefore it doesn't have an effect outside of itself. As long as there's a will for it, it exists. When the will is gone, that ceases to exist. Yeah. Just as when will departs from the soul, when it's not active, so it doesn't exist, it's gone. So we can tackle this from different angles, but let's look at this. We're running out of time, so I think we'll have to revisit again maybe next week a little bit more. But
don't you have to focus on it?
Oh.
You have to consciously...
Right. So the question is, let's look at it from this perspective. When you're trying to understand something, there's something that's outside of you, you're trying to understand it. When you love something, there's something outside of you, and you now either think about it or and start to develop feelings about it. Something that the idea or the emotion starts where outside of you. There's somebody else, I want to be kind to him. If there's nobody to be kind to, then there is no kindness. Kindness only exists when there's somebody to be kind to. So that's outside of the person. But will, you can want even when there's nothing. Will is just a movement, a feeling of the soul. And to take it back to God, before God creates, what does he want? There's nothing to want. And yet he wants. And that creates the reality of what it is that he wants. But that reality only exists so long as there's a will. So, but it starts from you. It doesn't start from the thing. That's why you can want something that really is not even good for you. Because it's not about the thing, it's about you.
But if you want something that's outside, it's something that you want.
Yes, you can want something outside of you, but the will itself only exists within the person. And therefore, once there is no will, there is no thing. Because the thing's whole existence is only your will for it. And so will is only impactful and only active within the person himself, not in something outside of the person. In other words, if I desire this cup of water, the cup of water only exists in my reality, when I talk about its desire, the desire for it, as long as I desire it. Once I don't desire it, it's non-existent to me. It's totally not there for me. But if I say, because I'm very thirsty, and the cup is, the water will quench my thirst, all those ideas will exist whether I'm thirsty or not. The feeling I have to it creates that connection between me and the thing. And when I don't have that feeling, true, that connection is gone, but the thing still remains. That water can still quench my thirst is still true whether I'm thirsty or not. Does that make sense? Ish? A little bit? So, but looking at it from that point is that all the other powers, the talents, the abilities of ourselves exist or become from something outside of ourselves. And they exist to function in something outside of ourselves. Whereas will remains within the soul. That's also why I think you could say that will is, why you say will, when there's a will, there's a way. Why is will the highest force, the greatest power and ability the person has? Because it's the soul, a movement of the essence. Because it's your essence, there's nothing that can get in the way of that. That's unstoppable. Whereas everything else, I can make an argument for it, I can make an argument against it, right? My feeling towards it could change. But will, as long as there's a will, it's there. And if there isn't, then it's not existent. And again, everything else functions for something outside of it. Intellect for the world of intellect, emotions for people or things outside of ourselves, and the attitude that we have towards them. Whereas will originates within ourselves. I want, and therefore, I look to express it maybe in something else, but I want, and it's the will itself is within myself, exists within myself. What time is it? 9:05. Should we keep reading a little, or? Well, we'll talk about it outside, and then we'll revisit it. We'll revisit next week. Anyway, the point of this whole thing about will is to say like this: we're trying to figure out we're trying to explain the idea of Achaisi, my sister, and we explain how Achaisi is Avram. Avram, you blended the world with God. What does it mean that he blends the world with God? That he revealed in the world, humanity, and in the world, the nature of existence itself is that it's not something that exists separate of God, and that God dominates it, that God is in charge of it, he's the boss, but that it exists only within God. And this could be understood in two ways. One is that God speaks the world in creation, and since he's creating something from nothing, he constantly has to sustain it because its true essence is nothing, is non-existence. So that's one aspect. But an even deeper level is that really creation emanates from God's will. And since it emanates from God's will, less asar panim in it is nowhere absent of him. In other words, it doesn't exist. It only exists as an expression of him. Not even as something else. So when I speak something into existence, there's me and there's the thing that I speak into existence. Granted, it doesn't have independent existence, but in a sense it's not me. It's something else that I'm expressing. But when I say it's my will, if it's my will, then it's just me. My will is me. It doesn't matter what I want. Whatever it is I want, it's me that we're seeing here. My will, not the thing. And so that's an even deeper level of bittul ha'olamus, of the world being totally non-existent, and its true existence being only God, is the idea of the world being created from God's will. All this expresses the idea of ichoy, that blending together. We're not just connecting God to the world, or God dominating the world, but how God's oneness can be understood even in creation. That's the idea of Achaisi. What this means and why we have to keep going beyond that, we'll already get back to on Tuesday, next Tuesday. Hashem.